Welcome to the Weekend Review, the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. I'm your host, Alicia Ntlantla-Jali. The United Democratic Movement UDM leader Bantu Holomisa says South Africa is in a crisis 30 years after democracy. Holomisa was speaking at the party's manifesto launch in Midrand. The party tabled its blueprint ahead of the May 29th general elections. Holomisa says there is a disconnect between citizens and government.
Corruption destroys freedom. Corruption destroys our freedom. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the living conditions of some of our people. Go to the townships and our rural areas and towns to see where people must jump over puddles of sewage, yet the spending of trillions of rands has been announced over the years. It is worse in the former homelands. The worst performing province is the Eastern Cape, the province, the birthplace of Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela, Chris Hani, Mbeki, and so on and so on. The roads are falling apart, aside from the N2 which Sanral is working on. The taps have run dry that were set up in the time of ministers Ronnie Castles and Cadre Asmal. There have been overwhelming calls for me and the UDM to come and fix the Eastern Cape. And it isn't as in the past, where I can use unorthodox methods to rise to power. The people must vote in the great numbers for the Eastern Cape. The UDM will reopen the factories and industries closed down by the ANC, as well as resuscitate the agricultural projects and the maintenance units used to maintain the roads without delay. The people of the region will be economically empowered to combat this neo-colonialism of a special kind, where Pakistanis dominate as shop owners. We will restore the Eastern Cape to the glory of yesteryear, where the people of the province own the province.
Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania is launching its national elections manifesto at the Orlando Communal Arena in Soweto today. Now, the party says the manifesto will mainly talk to the problems of the African people. PAC Secretary General Apapoe says the venue is significant because that is where the PAC was founded 65 years ago. Now, the party, which has a single representation in Parliament, is hoping to have more members this time around. Well, our reporter Ndebo Mogobo joins us live from the launch. Ndebo, look, a very good afternoon to you. The PAC says that for the very first time in years, it is going through to these polls as a united front. But what have been your observations on the ground so far?
Well, good afternoon, Alicia, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. Yes, indeed, the PAC has returned to its birthplace here in Soweto, the Orlando Communal Hall, to launch its manifesto for the 2024 elections. And of course, as you're asking that what has been the mood like, people have turned out in their numbers. They are just gearing up for the president to come and deliver the much anticipated 2024 election manifesto for the PAC. You would remember, Alicia, that they are here to sort of retrace the footsteps of their forebears, the likes of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, who founded this party on the 6th of April in 1959, to be precise. When he launched the party, he envisaged a party that would be ready for government when they return to South Africa after the apartheid system has been dismantled. And the PAC, as you will recall, that it contested the 1994 elections. And at the time, it garnered around 350,000 votes. That translated into around 5 parliamentary seats. But since then, it was led by then President Clarence Makwetu. But since then, immediately after the 1999 elections, or after the 1994 elections, when it went to the 1999 elections, everything changed for the PAC. The numbers or the electoral, it started experiencing the electoral decline. But now they are here again to retrace the footsteps of their forebears, and they are confident that indeed they will do well when during this forthcoming elections. But without wasting any time, Alicia, I would want to bring in the PAC Secretary General, Mr. Apapoe, just to sort of give us a sneak preview, not preempting what the President is likely to say when he delivers his manifesto launch, but a sneak preview of what is likely to be expected. Ntate Powe, you are here today launching the PAC manifesto, the party that has been experiencing electoral decline for some time now. As the PAC, is there anything that you will be offering, except the much talk about restoration of the land? Is there anything that you think you'll be offering to capture the imagination of the democratic electorate?
Definitely, we are going to offer a solution to the unemployment. We are going to offer a solution to the difficulties that are faced by our students in higher education. We are going to offer solutions to the healthcare sector. We are here meeting as the PAC to say we are an alternative government. We are a government that is waiting.
Ntate, you together with Azapo and the ANC, you fought side by side to liberate this country. For a lack of a better word, one could call you the liberators of this country. Today we're waking up in a South Africa that's liberated by, amongst others, the PAC, Azapo and the ANC. But it's a country where we are called the most unequal society in the world. It's not me, it's the World Bank. The country that is seen by many as the rape capital of the world. The country that is seen by many as the murder capital of the world. As the PAC and as one of the liberators, are you saying you failed the people of South Africa as liberators of this country?
Definitely, it's an indictment on all of us, particularly as Africans, as from our liberation movement. But you'll recall that the PAC message has always been the same, that without the land there can never be a liberation. We see all these challenges in our country because our people remain dispossessed, because the economy remains in the hands of the few. As you've correctly pointed out, the economy remains in the few hands of the whites. The economy remains in the hands of those who dispossessed us, who oppressed us. It can never be that we have that situation and we can have justice in this country. We will forever have this social ills that we talked of because of that. Once we address that, once there's economic empowerment, once there is economic return to the majority of our people, then some of these social ills that are here in our country can be resolved.
The election day has been announced, the 29th of May, it has been proclaimed. Now a jostle to the union buildings has begun. You as the PAC, where do you see yourself?
We are working very hard. We want to increase our representation in national parliament. We want to increase our representation in provincial legislatures. In the last local government elections, we increased our support of councillors in terms of councillors' representation twofold. This time around, we hope to increase our support tenfold. And we want to be the voice of the voiceless. We want to demonstrate that the PAC is capable to govern.
It's inevitable. South Africa is going to be a country that is governed through coalitions. At some point, you had talks with Azapo. How far are those negotiations? And beyond elections, where do you see yourself? Are you seeing yourself pairing up with other political parties, like-minded political parties, your BPC at some point, Socialist Party of Azania? Where do you see yourself?
We are currently having a very strong working relationship with Azapo. And we hope to continue to having that. We commemorate our days together. We are building towards that. We are having common programs that we are having with Azapo. Parties that emphasize the issue or the return of the land to the African people, the PAC will work with. There are many of such parties, and we have begun the relationship. We have seen us attending some of the functions of some of the parties that are now speaking the language of the PAC towards the unity of Africans. The first objective of the PAC is to unite and rally all Africans. And as the PAC, we want to emphasize on that. That is more important than even our own political parties. So if the parties out there believe in the message of the PAC, but somehow have their own political parties, they can still work with the PAC.
Okay, Ntatipoe, that was the PAC Secretary General, Apapoe, and with that is back to studio.
this now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has suspended his Deputy Minister of Small Business Development, Dipuo Peters. Ramaphosa's decision follows a sanction adopted by Parliament's Joint Committee on Ethics and members' interests against Peters. The committee found against her her conduct, and then Transport Minister. We're now joined by independent analyst Kaya Sithole on the line. Kaya, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome. Look, the suspension comes from activities cited by activists Zaki Ahmad and Zukiswa Fogazi, of course, in their expose around state capture breaches following the release of the Zondo Commission's report and, of course, that parliamentary bid by United Behind. Look, take us through the exact breaches you understand she's been found guilty of and what you make of her punishment, which, according to United Behind, is actually a slap on the wrist, and they have vowed to actually continue with the petition, to petition the president, rather, for a more severe punishment.
Good afternoon, into the view. So I think the history of the story is obviously linked to the question of what really became the governance chaos and paralysis that we saw in significant state entities for an extended period of time up until at least 2019. When she was the Minister of Transport, the PRASA entity fell under her portfolio. And of course, what we now know from the various commissions that you've seen in some of the reports that have been released, PRASA did indeed become one of those entities where there was a lot of governance malfeasance that was happening behind the scenes. But what seemed to have been the trigger point for Unite behind, a complaint against her was the fact that it was in her role as the minister where there was evidence of a dereliction of duty. And one example that they use is that at a point in time when the board of PRASA had undergone the process of trying to find a successor to Lucky Montana, the minister essentially paralyzed the process after more than 1.7 million rand had been spent on trying to find a successor CEO. So the sum of the various transgressions that she presided over during that time formed the basis for the complaint that was then lodged by Unite Behind. And I think obviously the critical element of this is that we know that politicians and allies hardly ever hold each other accountable. So it was quite important for this particular action to have been undertaken by an activist and an activist group. And of course, we've now seen a very rare instance of the accountability being enforced, even though one might argue about the quantum and the severity of the sanction.
And speaking of accountability there, Kai, look, I mean, the High Court found her conduct in dismissing the PRASA board and their failure to appoint a group CEO there as irrational, unreasonable, as well as unlawful. Now, could this be interpreted as willfully interfering in the probe into billions of rands in irregular expenditure, or do you think it's more around her oversight duties?
It's a combination of both, because obviously one always has to ask the question of why a minister or anyone with the duty to oversee public resources, how that person would see it fit for that organization to not have someone in charge of its operations in terms of the CEO, and also more importantly, why that person would then essentially frustrate the processes aimed at correcting that. So this wasn't simply a minister who was, negligent in their duties. This was a minister who was complicit in the process of paralyzing that entity. And we also do know that obviously a lot of the work that needed to be done in relation to the investigation, in relation to recovering some of the funds that had been lost, it obviously required the board of that entity to be able to then support those systems. And we know, if you look at the case of Martha Ngoye, for example, that it was essentially paralyzed because there were many people who did not want those investigations to be conducted. So the minister's own complicity in this made it a very easy case to lodge to say, well, actually, this was not a minister who was simply not aware of what was going on. This was a minister who knew enough to do particular things that actually then deepened the crisis that was there at PRASA.
Interesting, Kai, because Western Cape High Court acting judge there, Mushahid Adikari, also pointed to a danger of a breach of the separation of powers when Peters applied to have the impending suspension actually dismissed. Now, will this be true if there is failure to then punish her following the charge that she used PRASA buses for ANC events in 2014 and 2015 without ensuring payment from the party?
It's obviously a big problem that we've seen in relation to how there is always this overlap and this conflation of public resources versus party duties and responsibilities. I think in most instances, people do actually ask questions about, well, ahead of an election campaign, for example, if there's going to be a government event and a government person then accidentally drops hints about what their political party would do, should it be re-elected, does that amount to, obviously, an abuse of public resources in order to pursue a party political agenda? So those are probably the smaller issues. What became a big issue here is that you essentially had a situation where the allegation goes that the minister essentially said, we must use public resources in order to further a political party agenda. That was the first problem. The secondary problem, of course, is that even if that wasn't a major issue, it's a question of why is a minister issuing instructions in relation to the operational affairs of any entity that she oversees, because firstly she must interact only with the board must interact with management, and then management deals with operations. So you had first the question of the abuse of public resources for party political purposes, and then the secondary question of why was the minister issuing instructions of that kind in any case, regardless of whether it was an abuse of public resources. So you had a governance problem there, and you also had an accountability problem that, again, the minister was found to be at the center of.
Look, back to that punishment debacle. In November 2023, right, Peters was suspended from his seat in all parliamentary debate sittings, as well as committee meetings and functions and other operations for one term of the parliamentary program. But what was the effect of this, if any, especially in light of the latest development? In fact, is it fair then to have a public servant in such a compromising debacle still return to public office? Is this not sending the wrong message? Kaya, you still there?
You might find that there won't be anyone left in Parliament if we actually have to and accountability as robustly as it needs to be done. So I do think that obviously historically we haven't seen a very good track record of parliamentarians actually holding fellow politicians accountable. And I think it's quite important that this was an action that was essentially initiated by outsiders within the parliamentary system, and these were activists. And if that obviously becomes a way in which accountability can be enforced, it is something that is indeed to be welcomed. And obviously, in this instance, she has been suspended for one parliamentary term, and then the president yesterday also suspended her, and it does come with a financial penalty in that it's a suspension without pay. So it's a tentative step, it's a good step, but we need to see more of these actions, because if one had to say that she was a problem in failing to appoint a group CEO at PRASA, you can imagine what the case would be against the Minister of Public Enterprises if we had to follow the same reason.
Look, Kai, I mean, judging by other cases in this regard, what do you think then we can expect in terms of action and that accountability that you're referring to against other office bearers that are accused of state capture breaches? I mean, Judge Zondo himself not so long ago expressed his displeasure at the snail pace of the state capture related cases.
I think it is a good start because it has actually indicated to citizens that, by the way, we do not always have to rely on politicians to hold each other accountable now that we know that they do such a bad job of that. So, of course, because now we have a template of how to put together a decent and a well-structured complaint to the Ethics Committee, and how, in instances where the evidence is irrefutable, even they would struggle to exonerate one of their own, it simply means that South African citizens perhaps have another instrument of enforcing accountability. It always existed, but very few of us knew that you could actually use it and that you could actually get results that we've seen now. So I think it helps in the accountability where citizens are then in a position to say, perhaps let us pursue this angle in order to be able to get something moving, in order to get the wheels of justice to move in a particular direction. So it is something to be welcomed.
Thank you so much for your analysis there. That is independent analyst Mr. Kasi Tole on the suspension of Debo Peters. Electoral bodies in Africa have been urged to domesticate the principles and guidelines for the use of digital as well as social media on the continent. Now, a number of electoral bodies have been meeting in Johannesburg for the past 3 days in order to explore ways to tap into digital media in running free and fair as well as peaceful and credible elections. Kylie Kumalo has more.
energized and determined to up the ante in their respective countries. 16 electoral bodies from Africa have been meeting, looking at a number of issues, and the ultimate goal is to learn from each other and deliver free and fair polls. Innovation has been at the heart of these discussions.
Today you can't talk about the will of the people without looking at the environment within which that will is exercised. It is currently being exercised with the pervasive use of digital and social media. And in that respect, you certainly, as an electoral management body, need to give yourself time and opportunity to appreciate and understand those who use this, how they use them, and how you can enhance their use for elections. That's what this session has been about. We know social media has been around for a while.
Some of the key partners of Africa, like the United Nations and other central bodies, attended the session. It's absolutely vital as the continent gears up to have elections to avert democratic backsliding.
It's important for us to talk about the challenges that the use of social media poses within electoral processes. Of course, we also think and reflect around the uses, the beneficial uses of social media. So putting all of that together and having a document that, while not being a binding document, but provides clear principles and guidelines for the use of social and digital media, is an important event for us.
A really excellent initiative from the IEC. We hear a lot about many of the challenges that are there. They're quite different understandings of what we consider to be the same concepts, but I think that that's part and parcel of how we start to build consensus on, making sure that you can harness the good sides of social media and minimize the harms and the dangers that it poses to democratic process.
More electoral bodies in the continent have been encouraged to domesticate the principles and guidelines for the use of digital and social media in elections in Africa. The gathering has been wrapped up. It came at a critical phase as a number of countries in Africa will go to the polls this year. Khalehle Khumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, and we are intending to further the discussion after the break with Dr. Cadre on, of course, the dangers of social media as well as misinformation and disinformation, especially around the time of elections. Right now, though, let's take a quick ad break. We'll be back after that. This is the Week in Review. Welcome back. Now, as promised, electoral bodies in Africa have been urged to domesticate the principles as well as guidelines for the use of digital as well as social media on the continent. And for more on this, we are joined by Dr. Cadre, an academic and researcher at DUT. Doc, a very good afternoon to you and welcome to Week in Review. Look, what is your take on some of the guidelines that were actually launched on emphasizing the dangers of social media abuse and also a call for the responsible use as well as accountability from both platforms of owners as well as users?
Great, thank you for having me and good afternoon to your viewers. So yes, the establishment of the body can be described in three key points. The first one is it is a positive step. Establishing such a body is a significant move towards enhancing electoral integrity in the digital age. Why? Because they're recognizing the growing impact of digital platforms on democracy. Then secondly, the issue of the collaborative approach. The body and the guidelines, they signify an important collaboration among African electoral management bodies, where they highlight a continent-wide commitment to addressing digital and social media challenges and opportunities in election. Why is it important? Is because they're talking about the future ready, what we call future ready in the formation of this body. It anticipates the future electoral challenges, where they are setting a proactive stance in safeguarding democratic processes against the backdrop of evolving digital landscape. So yes, yeah.
Yes, Doctor, go ahead.
Yes, so actually the establishment of the body and the meeting of the 16 member countries can be described in also in various ways. I mean, it's about the responsibility of developing social media plans where the responsibility is shared amongst political parties, the MPAs, the stakeholders of elections, and those who are involved in the setting up on the infrastructure of social media platforms. So, about political parties are crucial. The development of social media plans is a collaborative approach, which involves MPMs, platforms, and stakeholder ensuring a comprehensive approach. But now, the guidelines also emphasizes the issue of beyond parties, where the EMP's active role in guiding responsible social media use, it underlines that responsibility extends beyond political parties. Normally, we point up on political parties where they say they're the ones who are communicating misinformation and disinformation. They are misleading people in their manifestos. So the responsibility or the guidelines in ensuring the safety use of social media and digital platforms during the election, it goes beyond political parties where they talk about a holistic strategy. They say this approach ensures a balanced strategy that reflects free speech and mitigates the media's potential negative impacts on electoral integrity. And everybody should be involved. Where the government, we're looking at the MBAs, the electoral management bodies, all these platforms, all these institutions must be involved. And we're not solely looking at the political parties who are communicating or who are vying for the president or to occupy political office, but everybody should be involved in ensuring that during the political, the elections, the use of social media and digital platforms is used in a way that adheres to the rights of people, the rights, human rights, and not violating and propagating harm, misinformation and disinformation in that processes.
Look, Doctor, I mean, the guidelines encourage African election management bodies to also develop clear as well as comprehensive plans for responsible social media use, as you've just alluded to, using election or during election campaigns. Now, can parties then enforce such? And how is such a largely unregulated space? And as we know, I mean, elections come with an influx of misinformation and disinformation. The Office of the Information Regulator actually held a sitting just before the final voter registration drive on this very same issue. They know that bots as well as parody accounts at surface are never easy to track to the real owners or perpetrators.
Right. So the regulation, the role of parties in regulation safeguards is very important because political parties are the key players in this discourse, in this dispensation of election. So they do play an influential role in the regulating their content stuff. But you should bear in mind that we're in the post-truth era, where appeal to emotions and personal beliefs is more important than the propagation or the communication effects. So in as much as political parties, we can't solely rely on political parties in regulating that space or content that they put out there on social media, because what they need is to communicate things that appeal to the people, but political parties' adherence to guidelines can significantly impact the online discourse, setting a precedence for campaign conduct and public engagement. But we cannot 100% rely on them, because what they need is they need to appeal to the emotions. They need to appeal to what people believe, because we're in the post-truth. So if we rely on somebody who wants to appeal to the emotions, then there are no facts, objectivity is thrown out the window. So what I say is collaboration is key. The effectiveness of guidelines also depends on the effort, collaborative effort of all stakeholders, including civil society and tech platforms, to ensure and uphold the standards. Right, there are enforcement challenges there. The commitment of parties and stakeholders to these guidelines is crucial. But so in establishing of robust mechanism, by EMBAs for the reinforcement and monitoring. Right, let's talk about the feasibility of establishing or implementing these regulations by political parties. It's highly problematic, like I said, for us to rely on political parties, because we need to look at their objective in mind. What do they need when they are communicating on digital platforms? What is the end goal? It's the political environment is complex and heightened, and emotions are high. So for political parties to reach out to the to those platforms where the environment is very highly competitive, people are receiving myriads of information at a single space of time. The only thing that they need or they do to appeal to these people is to put facts away and manipulate facts and communicate misinformation and disinformation for their purposes. So as a result, while their role of political parties is very critical and important in ensuring that these guidelines are implemented, we can't rely on them. Rather, we should rely on the collaboration between civil society, tech platforms, and rely on retraction of some content that is not true from platforms like X, like Instagram, like Facebook, and stuff like that. Because political parties really, they are what they are focused on is on attracting the numbers.
Very interesting that, Doc, because it's a thin line, right, between freedom of speech as well as censoring. So I suppose the difficult question there is, how do then users as well as the owners strike this fine balance very quickly?
All right. It's for users and the media owners to strike the balance very quickly. I think the issue boils down to the issue of self-regulation, and the issue of a verification of facts. So it behooves and it's incumbent on the users to always get down to facts. When you receive some information, it's not a good thing to do when you receive information or find information, you just propagate it, you share it quickly without getting to the point. Like verify the information, find what other credible news outlets are communicating the same information from this political party before a user shares that information, because you'd find that in a space of 2 minutes, just a misinformation or a disinformation can actually spread to thousands and thousands of people. And some people do not have time to verify and would take that as the truth. And people who do not have devices and resources to verify, they will actually go and be led to the polling station thinking that this political party ABC and this is what they're going to do. At the end of the day, that was information and disinformation. For those who own the platforms, for example, X, those who control and own those platforms, bringing into play the issue of regulation, it's a complex one when you're talking about regulating the social platforms, because there are free corridors where anybody can produce and consume at the same time. But the only hope that we have is that when issues are reported to X, to Instagram and Facebook, that this information propagated about this political party is not true and should be retracted. We hope that there is speed response from those owners of those platforms. I think that's the only hope we have. Other than that, the political parties must actually, in utmost honesty, try to propagate and communicate information that is true and that is factual and that is objective, so that we do not mislead the people to go to the polling station with false information.
Thank you so much for that. That is Dr. Tigere Morsinga, the academic as well as researcher at DUT. Then he says there is a need for verification proposals or portals for users to not be exposed to misinformation. Now, the DA wants the Constitutional Court to hold ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula in contempt of court and jail him. The party says it has filed papers in the Apex Court to force Mbalula to release the outstanding cadre deployment records as ordered by the very same court last month. Now, this emerged during a parliamentary debate on the professionalization of the public service.
A capable and professional state, that's what lawmakers want government to achieve in order to improve services. But ideas on the road to get there appears to differ at a political level, with the DA once again criticizing the ANC's cadre deployment policy as the root cause of poor governance. The party says it will go back to the Concord to ask the Apex Court to hold Mbalula in contempt of court.
I can confirm to this House that the DA is today filing fresh papers to hold ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula in contempt of court for failing to comply with the Constitutional Court's order that complete national cadre deployment records dating back to the 1st of January 2013, when President Ramaphosa became cadre chairman, must be handed over.
In another move, the DA says it has also filed a Promotion of Access to Information Act application to force the ANC to disclose all cadre deployment records.
The DA yesterday submitted a new request in terms of the Promotion of Access to Information Act to similarly expose complete records of the ANC's dozens of provincial and regional cadre deployment committees that have collapsed service delivery in all ANC-run provinces and municipalities. The ANC has 30 days to hand over these new records, and all I can say is tick-tock.
But the ANC has been quick to defend the cadre deployment policy and in turn also accused the DA of having its own cadre deployment.
The DA has also used deployment to reward their members with high remuneration, such as the former DA MP Tim Harris, who gets a whopping 2.5 million rand at West Grove, and the wife of Craig Kesson, who receives 3.3 million per year as an executive manager at the City of Cape Town. In Tshwane, the DA illegally appointed Stefan de Villiers, who was a bodybuilder, as a head of the executive of the Office of the Mayor, earning over 1 million rand a year, and Praveen Govender as Chief of Emergency with a fake qualification, to name a few. The ANC's cadre deployment cannot be questioned in principle, as it is the sine qua non of democracies across the world, and we must not allow the DA to reduce it to a mafia-like activity.
Other political parties say a professional public service can help improve service delivery.
Professionalization of the public service does not mean making public service white, as the DA refers to, as the racists, these people in the blue are referring to. Their fight against the so-called cadre deployment is in essence the fight against black professionals in the public sector. To the racists, being black equals incompetence and corruption, and being white equals competence and clean governance. We want the public service run professionally, free of corruption.
Professionalizing our public service will enhance service delivery, reduce corruption, increase trust and confidence of the public, ensure innovation within the sector, and lead to effective governance and policy implementation. Public service delivery in South Africa is at critical levels of dysfunction.
You must appoint it by appointing the best person for the job, irrespective of race, who has the appropriate track record, experience, qualifications, and references, not the person who is politically connected and in many cases otherwise incompetent. You have to put the needs of South Africans first, not the needs of the ANC and its cadres.
Meanwhile, the National Assembly also held a mini plenary on fee-free higher education for all in South Africa. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.
Now, South Africa is trying to extradite the two suspects from Eswatini linked in the killing of AKA and Tibbs. The pair was shot dead in Durban last year. 5 suspects have appeared at the Durban Magistrates Court in connection with the murder, as well as other charges.
South Africa and Eswatini are both signatories of the SADC protocol on extradition. It's been widely reported that the two of the alleged killers of the rapper Keenan Forbes, popularly known as AKA, and his friend Tabela Tips Motsuwane are in Eswatini, where they are held in custody. Pretoria and Babane are cordial partners, and there is an expectation that the extradition process will go fairly smoothly.
2 of the 7 people who have been accused of being involved in the murder of AKA, the rapper, are under arrest in Eswatini at the moment. And the question about bringing them to justice is a live issue which can be resolved by having the 2 persons in custody in Eswatini extradited to South Africa. This involves a process in the courts of Eswatini. It may involve some appeal processes as well, but it is available to the South African prosecuting authorities to seek to have the 2 arrested in Eswatini brought to justice in South Africa.
The 2 suspects are being wanted by South African Police Service. Hence, we are still in the process of doing that, of having them extradited back to South Africa, because we do have court papers with us that say that they are suspects that are indeed wanted for a few crimes that seemingly they committed in South Africa.
Forbes and Botswana were gunned down in Durban last year. Their deaths caused an unimaginable amount of grief in the country and beyond.
We are really happy that you are here. A lot of pressure has been put by this case since the death, the demise of AKA. Everybody knows that there's been the call every day that as the police and the law enforcement, we need to do better. One is quite happy. It's a sad situation to come here and see people that could do such a pain to the nation. I've never seen such a collective pain of the nation. I saw the young people yesterday when they were interviewed on the streets saying it's bittersweet. They are glad it's happening, but they've lost big.
Under the SADC protocol and extradition, extraditable offences that are punishable under the laws of both state parties by imprisonment or other deprivation of liberty for a period of at least a year or by a more severe penalty. The state parties shall, without undue delay, arrange for the surrender of the person. Khalihle Khumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Organizations in Nigeria employing expatriate workers will now have to pay a levy to the government. Now, the directive by the Nigerian government is meant to encourage foreign companies to employ more Nigerian workers. SABC News correspondent Ajek Mangut reports.
The government imposed a $15,000 annual levy for companies employing an expatriate director and $10,000 for other employees. The staff of diplomatic missions and government officials are exempt. The levy applies to employees who work for at least 180 days a year. Nigeria's president says the aim is to balance employment opportunities and close the wage gap between Nigerians and foreign workers. Economic experts say this could boost foreign earnings for the country. More than 150,000 expatriates are employed in Nigeria, while over 20 million Nigerians remain unemployed, according to government figures. The move comes as the government struggles to address economic challenges, including a high inflation rate, poverty and a cost of living crisis. It is exploring ways to increase revenue and reduce costs. The Nigerian Immigration Service will be in charge of enforcing the levy. Defaulting companies are expected to pay fines of up to 3 years and face jail terms of up to 5 years. Ajek Mangut, SABC News, Abuja.
All right, and that is a wrap from the Week in Review team. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alicia Ntlantla Jali. Have yourself a wonderful Saturday further. Goodbye.